Welcome back to Echo Ekoji with Joe, Gotchy, and me, Andrea Chapman. We're excited to kick off the second season of the podcast and are looking forward to posting programs at regular intervals in 2024 and beyond. Ekoji Buddhist Temple is located at 6500 Lake Haven Lane in Fairfax Station, Virginia. We have regular in-person and streaming Sunday services and Wednesday Zoom services led by Reverend Kurt Rye, as well as seminar, book, and movie discussions, meditation meetings, and special events like our annual Obon Summer Festival. You can find additional information at the temple's website, ekoji.org. Joe, what else would you like to tell our listeners about Ekoji?
Thanks, Andrea. Ekoji Buddhist Temple is affiliated with Buddhist Churches of America, a community that includes more than 60 temples located across the United States. Like all BCA temples, Ekoji is a Jodo Shinshu temple. Shin Buddhism is a non-monastic tradition founded by Shinran Shonin, who lived between 1173 and 1263. Our main practice is listening to the Dharma, or the teachings. The tradition is a family-friendly path that all ages can participate in together. What's more, we welcome everybody as they are. Andrea, I think it's time for you to introduce our first guest for 2024.
Thanks, Joe. Today we are privileged to have Michael Huff, an Ekoji Sangha member and recently elected to the Ekoji Board of Directors with us. He serves on the executive committee and is our current secretary of the board. Welcome, Michael. In 3 minutes or less, Michael, what can you tell us about your secular self or your personal history that will help others come to know you better?
I am a world traveler. I spent over 20 years, or close to 20 years in the United States Foreign Service as a diplomat, with most of my postings being in East Asia and the Pacific, Southeast Asia. I have a lifelong interest in Buddhism. I am a child of the 70s. I was in high school during the 1970s, and anything Eastern mysticism related at that time was a big part of, well, not a big part, it was just part of the scene, let's say. Yeah. I am soon to be divorced, which is a big part of my story and coming to Ekoji. I have 2 wonderful children, a daughter who is in her late teens and a son who is in his mid-teens. And they think it's very funny that I'm going to be getting a Japanese name this weekend.
Oh, very good.
Let me see what else. I am an avid hiker. I love the outdoors. Love hiking in the mountains. I am formerly a scuba diver. I did a lot of scuba diving in the South Pacific and around Japan when I was posted in Japan. I like jazz and classical music. I used to like rock and roll, but I find the older I get, the harder it is for me to listen to. I only listen to it now when I clean house. But other than that, I think those are some basics about me. But I'm a big reader. Oh, and I think one very important thing, I am a professional librarian by education and training. And I was actually a librarian with the Department of State working in educational programs overseas. I enjoy reading, and I probably have close to 10,000 books in my apartment from my library of over, I just turned 60 recently, and those are books that go back to my childhood. I never got rid of a single one of them. So
that's wonderful, Michael. I have to tell you that I'm really thrilled to be part of this podcast and get the chance to meet you and know you a little better through the Ekoji Sunday and Wednesday services and the Dharma exchanges. That's been a really meaningful experience for me in getting to know you there. Tell us a little bit more about, well, first of all, did you grow up in a Buddhist family or a religious family? And how is it that in 2024 you've gotten to this point in terms of finding the Buddhist path?
No, I was not born into a Buddhist family. I was brought up in a secular American family. My father had been raised Roman Catholic, but was not a practicing Roman Catholic in his adulthood. My mother took my sister and I to church on Sundays during the late 1960s and early 1970s, primarily for her social scene, but that was it. Then in the 1970s, as I became a teenager myself, I read a book by Jack Kerouac, On the Road. And my mother, when she saw that I was interested in this book, for my birthday, she bought me another of Kerouac's books called The Dharma Bums. The Dharma Bums is loosely based on Jack Kerouac's adventures with the American poet Gary Snyder. Both Gary Snyder and Jack Kerouac were members or participants in Jodo Shinshu Sanghas in California in the late 40s, early 50s. Snyder, who's still living, I think he's the last of the beat poets who is still kicking in with us, and he's as spry as ever. I just was at an online event with him this past summer. Anyhow, so having read that book, I became very interested in Buddhism and began a lifelong interest in Buddhism. I was what I have since heard called a nightstand Buddhist. The first time I heard that was when I came to Ekoji, and it's a very apt description of what I was. I read a lot, incessantly sometimes, about Buddhism, but I wasn't part of a Sangha. Okay, I was learning about it, and I was teaching well, I take that back. I did participate in meditation, Vipassana meditation classes during college back in the early 1980s. But it wasn't really a Sangha. It was meditation divorced of the rest of the teachings of Buddhism. Then after I became a foreign service officer, I spent most of my career in East Asia and the Pacific, Central Asia. I learned a great deal about many different forms of Buddhism. But right before I joined the Foreign Service, I taught at a university in Vietnam. I lived in a Cambodian neighborhood. My neighbors were Theravada Buddhist monks who wanted to learn English from me. So I had a nice introduction there. I lived in Japan. I worked extensively in Mongolia, many parts of China, Taiwan, and so was introduced to many kinds of Buddhism. Fast forward now to 2019, and I had recently separated from my wife of 20 years, and the pandemic hit. Yeah. And I was not able to see my children, and I had just moved into an apartment by myself and was at very loose ends, and it was a hard time for everyone, wasn't it? It really, really was. I mean, everyone has a story about the pandemic. And then in 2021, I think the summer of 2021, I started looking for something to do spiritually. I had reached a point in my life where I realized I needed something more than my day-to-day life. Okay, I needed to, and also being somebody approaching 60 at that point, if I'm a lucky man, I've got another 20 years to live if I'm average. So I'm in the home stretch, as it were. So we start thinking about those things as we get older. And I found Ekoji online, and I checked it out, along with some other religious services. One thing I didn't mention earlier was that when I was in university, I was a practicing Quaker. I attended the Quaker Friends meeting house down in Richmond, Virginia. I was very active in the peace and justice movement. This was back in the 1980s with a lot of, the anti-nuke movement and a lot of things there. So I did participate in religion myself. I've always been interested in the religious expression of humanity in all its forms. And I've been very fortunate to see that around the world.
Yeah.
I have been very fortunate to see that around the world. So I found Ekoji. Okay, I had gone back. My old Quaker meeting house down in Richmond was doing things online, but it wasn't resonating with me the same way it did with my 20-year-old self. And I found Ekoji, and I would attend services. And as soon as the service was over, I would leave. I'm not going to hang out for this Dharma meeting thing after. And then I started hanging out for the Dharma discussion afterwards, with my camera off as a lurker, as you're called. And then one day I mustered up enough courage to speak up, and I haven't shut up since then. So that's how I came to Ekoji.
Thank you.
We are so grateful you did muster that courage. And I love that the Dharma has been pursuing you since a young age.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask you, Michael, do you think that there is a discernible difference between the way, say, heritage Buddhists who were born into families that had already embraced Jodo Shinshu tradition and those who convert or choose to just appreciate and live their lives as Buddhists?
1,000%. I knew a lot of Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, and other Buddhists, different forms of it when I was working in Japan. And I'll be frank, many of my Japanese friends thought of Amida Buddha as a god. They viewed Amida Buddha as a god. Okay. I remember my jaw hitting the floor the first time I heard one of them express that. But that's how they approach. That's how they approach Jodo Shinshu. That's how they approach the Nembutsu. And if there is one thing that I have learned the older that I've gotten, is that I know nothing, which I think is one of the reasons the writings of Shinran Shonin appeal to me so much, is because he made a point of saying, I don't know anything. All I know is that I'm going to say the Nembutsu. And so I think a lot of people that are born into the Jodo Shinshu faith, as with anyone born into any faith, they look at it very often, not always, but very often, without question. They just, this is what it is. I'm not going to worry about what it means. And they do look at it more from a point of view of salvation, and then on the flip side, with me, maybe you, when coming to Buddhism as a convert, and we've got a lot of questions. We come at it from a questioning standpoint. We don't come at it from an accepting standpoint necessarily when we first enter the faith. And I think that is the big difference that I have seen. But again, I don't know anything, but that's one thing I notice.
Michael, if I remember correctly, toward the end of his life, Ben Franklin said that the older he got, the less he was convinced he knew what the truth was. So how do you incorporate Jodo Shinshu Buddhism into your everyday life? How does it benefit you?
All right. Well, before I started saying the Nembutsu on a regular basis, before the Nembutsu had become a part of my unthinking response to life, I had encountered some writings about Nikon. And that inward looking, which was it's a form of therapy, psychological therapy in Japan, of looking at things to be grateful for. And I'm oversimplifying it there. But I started keeping a Nikon journal first. And I have continued to do that. I have, about 5 of these filled up now. And there we go. There, it's not blurry.
Yeah.
Every night before I go to bed, I ask myself those 3 questions. What did I receive today? What have I given today? And how have I caused anybody any harm or trouble today? And then I added something on my own. When I wake up in the morning with my coffee, I read that over and I write a short reflection on what I recorded the night before I went to bed. So though Nikon inward lookingness in that way is not really a part of Jodo Shinshu doctrine, so to speak, it is a practice that is developed out of Jodo Shinshu. Okay. So having entered the door that way, I now have a Butsudan over by my front door. I have an Nembutsu scroll on my wall. I say the Nembutsu in the morning. I will chant usually the Junirai, which is my favorite of the chants.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Nagarjuna, the guy who was supposed to have written it. And if they're not fresh flowers from my garden or things that I've gathered, I have the flowers there. I do make a fruit offering, usually, and I try and be pretty orthodox and traditional about how I practice Jodo Shinshu at home on a daily basis.
Andrea, can I ask you a quick follow-up? Michael, for those people viewing the podcast who maybe are not Buddhists, not Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, what do you mean when you use the word Nembutsu? What is the Nembutsu? What does it mean?
The Nembutsu takes a lot of different forms throughout Buddhism, but for us, it is a 6-character phrase, Namo Amida Butsu, and loosely translated, it means I take refuge in Amida Buddha. And it is what I've heard many people call in Jodo Shinshu our practiceless practice. It's the thing that we do and it is for us an expression of gratitude for Amida Buddha. Was once a man named Dharmakara who vowed to become a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is someone in Mahayana Buddhism who has achieved enlightenment, but rather than going, never being reborn again, and escaping samsara, escaping the wheel of life, says, you know what? I'm going to go back and help everybody else achieve enlightenment too. And Dharmakara and now Amida Buddha is a bodhisattva. And the Nembutsu is our way of expressing gratitude for that vow. There's a lot to talk about there, but in a nutshell, that's it. It's an expression of gratitude for the bodhisattva vow of Amida Buddha.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing your beautiful practice with us. I'm really curious and excited to hear your answer to the next question after what we just learned about you. When it comes to the 3 treasures, which are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which do you think is the most important and why?
For me, the Sangha, because it was the one that I came to the latest in my life. and the other two did not achieve their full meaning until I was part of a Sangha. Now, having said that, the Buddha was a teacher. The Dharma is the teaching, and the Sangha are the students. A teacher with a teaching and no students, what good is that? Students who have to learn something but don't have anyone to teach it to them, how good is that? A teacher and some students with nothing to learn together, well, they just sit there and stare at each other. So all three of them are equally important. But again, for me and the journey that I've taken, the Sangha has been the absolute most important. My Buddhist journey was not complete until I was part of a Sangha.
Thank you, Michael. Wow. I hesitate to ask this next question of a librarian or somebody trained in library science, but when you think about Buddhist texts, sutras, or books, what's been most useful to you? Maybe one or two suggestions. And if somebody's just entering the path, do you have a recommendation for them?
I really had to hold off. So when I saw this question on the list of things you sent to me earlier, I was like, oh my goodness, have they lost their mind? So yes, I haven't pulled it from the shelf, but there is a wonderful book that is available for purchase through the Buddhist Churches of America bookstore called Ocean. If you are new to the Jodo Shinshu path, I would highly recommend beginning with that book. When I first started reading about Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, one of the first books that I read was The River of Fire, River of Water.
Yes.
By Taitetsu Uno, who was a religious scholar at Smith College, that goes over the basics of Jodo Shinshu. When I first discovered Ekoji and decided, I think I'm going to stick with these people for a while, there was a recent, fairly recent publication now called The Heart of the Shin Buddhist Path.
Yes.
By Mr. Takamaro Shigaraki, and it was translated by David Matsumoto. Much more in depth, a little bit more, I'm just going to say a little bit more in depth. And so for the Shin Buddhist path, for things outside of the sutras, the three Pure Land Sutras, for things outside of the writings of Shinran Shonin and Renyo, that's where I would suggest people start.
Thank you.
So next question is, what one question would you like to ask a Buddhist scholar about Buddhism or Jodo Shinshu Buddhism in particular, and why specifically is that question of interest to you?
What is rebirth? Okay. And maybe I don't need to know what that means. Does it mean being reborn from moment to moment in my life, which happens every day? Every day I'm reborn. With each passing second, I don't even know it's happening. The big question that you often hear from Westerners is, well, if there is no eternal soul, what's reborn? Because for those out there listening who might be very new to Buddhism, one of the key tenets of Buddhism is that there is no enduring permanent self. Yes, of course, there's a me. I'm sitting here right now, but I am not who I was when I was born or when I was a little boy, or even physically, my body's probably turned over 4 or 5 times now. So, what is rebirth? And because when you read when you read ancient Buddhist texts from other, other streams of Buddhism as well, rebirth is a very, very important part about what makes Buddhism tick. Okay, what makes the philosophy of Shakyamuni Buddha resonate, and rebirth is a big part of that. And here in the West, it's a big concept for those of us who were raised Judeo-Christian backgrounds to wrap our heads around. So what is rebirth?
Thank you. If I remember correctly, during one of our Dharma exchanges, you mentioned that you had undertaken the study of ancient languages. Was it Pali and Sanskrit? And if one or the other or both, why did you undertake that challenge?
Both languages, of course, because I'm very interested in Buddhism. I started taking Sanskrit before I came to Ekoji. And I'll be honest, I started taking it because I was going stir crazy during the pandemic, and I didn't want to lose what few IQ points I had, boredom. And I thought, learning, having been a foreign service officer, there is no way to generate new neural connections like learning a new language. And I'd always been interested in, the Bhagavad Gita and ancient Indian literature, but then also the Mahayana Buddhist literature, which was originally written in Sanskrit, later translated into Chinese. And then Pali, after I'd done Sanskrit, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do Pali as well, because it was probably the closest thing to what the historical Buddha spoke. And so what is recorded in that language is probably as close as you're going to get to the original teachings, although it's 2,500 years ago. So
yeah,
it might as well be a parallel universe, as to be an historical time. But it's been fun. I've met people from around the world. As much of a hardship as the pandemic was, it opened up things like what we're doing right now, for these virtual communities to flourish and blossom. And these classes were part of that.
Thank you.
I'm very curious now how you went from lurker to member, not only member, but then board of directors. Was there a why or a catalyst that prompted you to become a member of the temple?
I came to Ekoji at a very difficult juncture in my life personally, which I have alluded to, and also socially, everything that was going on with the pandemic. And having been a member of a Quaker church before, I know how very important membership of our institutions, no matter what your faith is, how important membership is. And because I am very fortunate in my life to have been a foreign service officer, when I was growing up, my father's always said, son, get a government job. Dad, I do not want to work for the government. I'm sorry, I don't want to do it. But boy, am I ever glad that I did. It has made I have received a great deal in my life. I want to give a great deal back. Ekoji gave a great deal to me. And I am hoping that by serving on the board of directors, that I will be able to pay even just a fraction back of what this Sangha has given to me.
So, Michael, do you see your decision to run for the board of directors as a form of selfless giving, what we call dana?
Yes. I mean, I do. And there's a little bit that's not so selfless though either. I have a selfish desire to see this Sangha succeed. It's important to me for all my human reasons. I love this place, and and so whatever I can do to help out, I want to do that. I really do.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I think I speak for Joe and I when I echo your sentiment, and we too love Ekoji. So thank you for giving selfishly to Ekoji. What is your ultimate goal as you follow the Buddhist path in this world in which we live?
Wow. To do no harm. To do no harm, and to achieve that goal, to be kind. I don't know that I'm so much worried about my individual enlightenment in a pure land, whatever that may be. But this is what I'm doing right now, and if it helps me be a kinder person, I want to keep doing that.
Michael, this has been a terrific time talking with you, learning more about you. You're making me think about all these questions as well. We have two final questions, and they're kind of short ones, but profound. Let's call them profound. Here's the last one that I have: Shinran or Renyo?
Kind of like the Stones or the Beatles, right? I'm gonna go Shinran on that, because I too am a bald-headed old fool these days. And but the other, I could throw you a curveball on this one too, and I'm really interested in Renyo's manservant Doshu, who was the first Myokonin,
Yes.
who is just a common person, who is very faithful. And if I cannot aspire to the levels of Shinran or Enyo, but I can try and aspire to be a good guy. But yeah, I'm going to go for the bald-headed old fool.
Very good. Okay, last but not least, Michael, we would like to ask you, what does Ekoji mean to you?
Ekoji means the Sangha. It means community. It means mutual support. It means having a place for people who are seeking the Buddha Dharma to come. That's what Ekoji is to me. Ekoji was there for me when I was seeking the Buddha Dharma, and I want Ekoji to be there for others who might be doing the same.
On behalf of Ekoji Buddhist Temple in Fairfax Station, Virginia, we'd like to thank you for joining us today for this first episode of Season 2 of Echo Ekoji. We'd also like to thank Michael Huff for sharing his insights and thoughts with us. Visit ekoji.org and BuddhistChurchesOfAmerica.org for more information and resources concerning Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. Ekoji's mission is to create a worldwide Sangha through our in-person and streaming services and programs. Thanks for tuning in. Along with Joe, I'm Andrea Chapman, and we are grateful for your support. Namo Amida.
Yeah.